Is Jeffrey B. Geisner, founder of the Jewish Culture and Holocaust. October 7th Remembrance in the Stand Against Hate International Communities. Thanks for joining us for my latest film, Walking on Blood, with our special guests, Grant Gochin and Slivia Foti. Both are international champions against the blatant Holocaust denial and revisionism currently happening in Lithuania. Slivia Foti shares her family's life story of what it was like to be the granddaughter of Jonas Noreika, a Lithuanian captain and Nazi perpetrator who singularly ordered the murder of over 10,000 Jews from Lithuania during the Holocaust. Noreika is still considered to be a national war hero in Lithuania. Grant Gochin, a legal scholar, has been fighting Lithuania's Holocaust denial and revisionism for more than 30 years. Music by Cantor Ozzy Schwartz. A word of caution and a trigger warning. The subject matter in this film is for mature audiences of ages 16 and older. The photos, video, recordings, music, pictures, and content of this film may be disturbing to some who suffer from intergenerational survivor trauma or PTSD disorders. Please help us spread the word about Walking on Blood by subscribing to the Jewish Culture and Holocaust, October 7th YouTube channel. You will be automatically notified of the new on-demand films released weekly. Each film is created and produced by Jeffrey B. Geisner, founder. Please share this free on-demand film with your family and friends of all religions. We all must do our part to push back against Holocaust denial and stand against hate. Enjoy the on-demand film.
עוד יבוא שלום, עוד יבוא שלום עלינו, עוד יבוא שלום, עוד יבוא שלום עלינו, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואימרו אמן.
My name is Slivia Foti, the granddaughter of Jonas Noreika. I am speaking to you from my home in Chicago, wishing that I could be with you in your magnificent, beautiful, and holy sanctuary, Synagogue Nijay Israel in Mexico City. I am honored to speak with you today regarding the release of my book, The Nazi's Granddaughter. When I first learned that Nijay Israel is a replica of the synagogue of the village of Šiauliai in Lithuania, it struck me on an extremely personal note, since I am familiar with the history of the original synagogue. Reflecting on the ties between the two synagogues in space and time has become of paramount importance to me. You see, my grandfather likely stood facing your families in the original of the synagogue in Šiauliai. Now I, his granddaughter, stand facing the descendants in the replica of the original in Mexico City. I would like to address the history of the synagogue. Nijay Israel was consecrated in 1941 by Jewish immigrants from Šiauliai. The prototype for Nijay Israel was destroyed in that very same year, 1941. The Jews of Šiauliai, who had not immigrated to Mexico or elsewhere, were murdered in that same year, 1941. Those were your families. A long-standing community of Jews and their holy spaces annihilated in the very same year this synagogue was dedicated. 80 years ago. Their children, the very future of the Jewish people, were murdered alongside their parents, grandparents, and families. Why did this happen? Who allowed it? Who carried out the murders? The woman I thought I was prior to beginning my research for this book no longer exists. The woman I have become, after having diligently conducted my investigation, are two dramatically different women. I started out as the granddaughter of a Lithuanian hero. Today, I am the granddaughter of a Lithuanian monster. Let me reconcile for you how that is possible. Let us go back to the beginning. Hatred toward Jews became a feature of Lithuanian society in the 1930s. My grandfather was at the forefront of that movement. He wrote Lithuania's equivalent of Hitler's Mein Kampf. During the Holocaust, my grandfather was in charge of the second largest region in Lithuania, and therefore he was responsible for the persecution and murder of Jews under his dominion and the plunder of their property. He may or may not have participated in the direct physical murders of your families and other Jews. He may or may not have personally destroyed the original of the synagogue. He may or may not have been directly responsible for the destruction of many other synagogues. But during that period, he was in command, and those atrocities were under his watch. Those atrocities were his responsibility. The government of Lithuania is engaged in Holocaust denial and revisionism and currently heralds him as a national hero. He enjoys mythological status within Lithuania. An intricate web of lies has been written about him while totally negating his horrendous deeds. His Jewish victims have been dismissed by Lithuania as an inconvenient tragedy to be explained away. What the government of Lithuania has done regarding my own grandfather is one of the greatest criminal cover-ups in all of history. As a young girl, I believed my grandfather was one of the most splendid heroes of all time. As an adolescent, I was proud to be connected to his glorious name. Then as an adult, the unspeakable truth was revealed to me. I only then realized that the mission of my research had to change. As a practicing Catholic, I simply had to do the right thing. It is incumbent upon me to correct history. My greatest hope is that this book will light the flame of truth for Lithuania to recognize the terrible history of the Shoah as it unfolded in 1941. Once that is truly recognized, and it will take time, it will allow the crucial healing process to begin for all Lithuanians. True reconciliation between Lithuanians and Jews can only be based on truth. After my grandfather enabled the destruction of the original of this synagogue, I stand before you. I acknowledge the culpability of my family in the murder and destruction of yours. My grandfather will remain to me a monster. Those watching are the families of his victims. I know that forgiving is impossible. Only the murdered may forgive, and they are not here to do that. So, I ask you to accept my genuine, personal apology. I am sorry for the sins of my grandfather, and I am sorry for what the Lithuanian government continues to do. I know that I personally am not responsible for my family and national guilt. Nonetheless, I face you with humiliation, guilt, remorse, and overwhelming sadness. I promise you I will do everything I can to make certain that the truth about my grandfather will be the only story of his life. The little girl who never met her grandfather but was raised to idolize him is now grown up and willing to tell the truth. I implore the Lithuanian government to do the same. The cover-up and rewriting of history must be brought to an end now. My mission will continue to be to speak the truth about this time in history, to bring awareness and education, and through this, to help us walk toward healing 80 years later.
A cluster of overgrown mounds on disused land marks the site of a massacre. Here, outside the city of Kaunas, Lithuania, lie the remains of an estimated 5,000 Jews. Over 70 years ago, they were rounded up, marched to this spot, and killed by their own countrymen, says Ruta Vanagaita. But such things have not been talked about in Lithuania before now. Vanagaita is a best-selling author, and she's written a book on Lithuanians' complicity in the Holocaust.
5,000 citizens of Lithuania killed by another couple of hundred of our citizens is not an important part of history. It's the first mass murder site in Lithuania ever. So it is worth of just this kind of stick, and in the private territory, and the feasts are being organized there. It just says a lot of bad things about my country and about the attitude to the people who were killed.
On the outskirts of Vilnius, a local resident recalls his grandmother's account of what she witnessed. Nearly 2,000 Jews were murdered here.
My grandmother told me that they drove the Jews past that pond over there. Then they collected their valuables, their glasses, earrings, wedding rings, and so on, and they led them into the forest and made them line up. There were women carrying babies among them. Then came the machine gun fire, ta-ta-ta, and they all fell into the pit. My grandmother told me the pit was as full of bodies as a bowl with soup. And who drove the Jews there? The Lithuanians, who else? There weren't any Germans there, maybe one or two standing off to one side.
Nazi Germany carries the principal responsibility for the Holocaust, but how great was the complicity of the Lithuanians? This is the subject of a bitter debate currently raging in the country. Vanagaita spent half a year scouring the archives in the Lithuanian capital Vilnius. She discovered that her own family had been involved in the mass murder of Lithuanian Jews.
I realized that, my grandfather, who was a hero, who was anti-Soviet and suffered for Lithuania, also was not, I wouldn't say the perpetrator or the killer, but he was one of the people who made this massacre possible. So it means that my country's history, the victims and heroes, could have been, participants of the murders as well.
In the summer of 1941, German forces occupied Lithuania. But after 2 years of foreign rule by the Soviet Union, many Lithuanians welcomed the invaders as liberators. This banner says, "Lithuania serves the Führer." The Nazis had no trouble finding collaborators. Whether it was 1,000 or 20,000 is hotly disputed. But there can be no doubt that with their help, over 90% of Lithuania's Jews, about 200,000 people, died in the Holocaust. Ruta Vanagaita is not afraid to face her critics, not even the right-wing extremists, as they march through Kaunas. On the internet, Vanagaita has been reviled as a traitor.
You say the Lithuanians liked killing Jews. I doubt that.
No, I didn't write that.
Well, I haven't read the book.
That's how it is. Nobody's read the book, but everybody thinks I want to harm Lithuania.
Vanagaita says she intends just the opposite. She wants Lithuania to face up to its past. A first step could be to publish a list naming the Lithuanian collaborators that the Historical Institute compiled in the fall of 2016 after years of controversy. Ephraim Zuroff recites the Mourner's Kaddish, a Jewish prayer for the dead. His great-uncle was among those murdered in Lithuania. As director of the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Jerusalem, Zuroff is one of the principal Nazi hunters. He's been supporting Vanagaita's efforts for years and pressuring the Lithuanian government to admit to the country's role in the Holocaust.
Lithuania is full of places like this. This is no different than dozens and dozens and dozens, more than 200 such places. Beautiful forests. In the middle of a beautiful forest, all of a sudden you have a mass murder site.
The Jews were never considered, our citizens, people like us, that the memory should be respected. They were, they deserved what they got. That is it. I mean, people wouldn't say it openly, but why the places are neglected, never visited, and you see that nobody even give a thought that these people are there. They were not brought to nice cemeteries. They are there in 5-6 layers.
Ruta Vanagaita and Ephraim Zuroff say the situation is unacceptable. They intend to carry on until Lithuania is ready to face its past.
We are the murdered Jews of Plunga, Lithuania. We've been silent for over 80 years. But now we have a film that gives us back our voice. Our film will tell you the truth about the depravity, the torture, the mass murder. We will name our killer Jonas Noreika. Jonas Noreika, hero of the Lithuanian government, the world leaders in Holocaust lies. But this time, their lies won't work.
The best place to start exploring Yiddish culture in Vilnius is 7 kilometers out of town in the suburb of Panarai. It was here between 1941 and 1944 that German Nazis and their Lithuanian allies murdered 100,000 people in what is now known as the Panarai Massacre. 70,000 of the victims were Jewish.
Well, welcome to the programme, and today's special guest is a documentary filmmaker. His name is Michael Kurtzner, and you're from the Warwick area, but originally from Zimbabwe. So I just want to thank you for making the film that you've made, J Accused. I watched it last night. It was very powerful, extremely moving, highlighting Lithuania's role during the Holocaust.
Documentary works best to express ideas in their full form, in other words, to convey the emotion of an idea, as well as something of the factual nature of that idea. I don't think it's the most intellectual form of media. If you want something more intellectual, really it should be academic, where it's cross-referenced, where it's peer-reviewed and things like that. But what I've done in my film is have the benefit of many scholars, and I like to think that the facts represented in my film, remember, many of them are contentious because Lithuania has done its best to make them contentious, even when they were perfectly clear what they are. They do their best to muddy the waters always. This was the best way of expressing this story. And it was only when I went back in 2019 to attend an unveiling of a monument which sought to name the 2,400 Jews who were murdered in a day in my own hometown, Birge. And we had this fabric draped over this lovely monument, and the drape was pulled down, and I found myself staring at a wall of Kretzmers, my own name. And this is what happened to my family. And suddenly in that instance, literally there were scores of them, probably 80. I looked at this list, and suddenly so many secrets of my own family became clear. Why there were so few of us, why my father was always so angry, why my grandmother was depressed. It answered a million questions that had rooted somewhere in my soul, but I hadn't really had the occasion to ask. Incidentally, on the naming thing, so successful were the murderers in Lithuania that of the 2,400 Jews who were murdered in Birge on the 8th of August 1941, they could only name 555. All the other names are lost. And that's true right across Lithuania. There are 200 mass killing sites in Lithuania. It was the most successful Holocaust in Europe, not in terms of numbers, but in terms of proportions. There are only 4 with any names at all. Not only did they kill us, they also wiped out our names, which I find an incredible insult and very, very tragic.
Absolutely horrific as well. Michael, share with us this kind of hidden history, because essentially your excellent documentary, J Accused, actually highlights this hidden history of what happened to your community, the Jewish community in Lithuania during the Second World War. Why is it that you had to do this research, and why has it been so hidden for almost 80 years?
I'm certainly not the first to have done this, and I'm certainly not the most prestigious to have done this. There have been great people working on this for decades. There's defendinghistory.com, an excellent resource. There's Ephraim Zurov, there's Ruta Venegaita, and then there's Slivia, Foti and Gochin, who have been working on this for decades. I've only been working on it for 3 years, so I'm the lowest of that list. But I think the reason that people didn't go into it, even though the facts were fairly well established, was because of the pain it caused from the Jewish side. And from the non-Jewish side, maybe it's the same, or maybe they're just bored by it. I have no idea why Europe has such little real interest in the Holocaust. They're great at preening themselves and saying how much they care about it, but I don't believe it for a moment. I think the entire enterprise has been to forget, and they've done a very successful job, most overtly in places like Lithuania, which were, incidentally, the worst killing grounds of the Holocaust.
And share with us how your film J Accused actually came about. Share us the idea. Obviously your experience in Lithuania is probably life-changing, it affected you personally, so this is a very personal film essentially about what happened to your family and the rest of the Jewish community in Lithuania. But why was this such a passion, almost bordering on obsession, to get this film made so that you could expose what the Lithuanian government was actually hiding, and also these horrendous crimes against humanity, against the Jewish people during the Holocaust?
You've got it dead right. It did become an obsession. And what happened is I went to Lithuania, and I think as a form of emotional protection, I looked at everything through the lens of a film. I made a film when I went there for that naming ceremony. And after that film, I made a piece that reflected the fact that people joined us on the walk to the thing, and there were lots of Lithuanian officials. And basically, Simon, I fell for all their nonsense propaganda. I honestly thought this was a country that had come to terms honestly with what it had done and was requesting an accommodation with the Jewish people based on truth. And after that, Lithuanian television, through another company, offered me a lot of money to make a film called Letter to Lithuania, very grand, very pompous. And I was keen to do it. And I was I was researching this film when I suddenly realized that things were not what they seemed to be. That really what I'd been exposed to in my own hometown, where those 2,400 people were murdered, Birge it's called, was all stage-managed propaganda, and all there to sanitize Lithuania's public image. And what made me absolutely aware of was the way they kept offering me money. They kept throwing money at me. I never accepted a penny. I never took a penny. But it seemed odd to me that they were offering money for something I hadn't even done yet. I had done no work on it. And I suddenly realized the reason they're doing this is because I'm a Jew and they think a Jew can't refuse money. Honestly, they're as stupid as that. That's what they thought. And at that stage, I was already starting to read the work of Slivia Foti, that hero of our times, and Grant Gochin and other people, and I suddenly realized what a great fraud had taken place and how successful Lithuania had been in disguising and lying about its own Holocaust past. When I realized that, I made a promise one day. I made a promise both to my murdered family and to God that I would do whatever I could to fight this outrage. I had nothing. I was retired. I didn't have any money. I was a small. I had a little farm I'd built in a little bit of land I'd cultivated in the middle of the West Midlands. I was already 10 years retired. But I made a promise that I would do whatever I could to fight this outrage, and the only way I could fight was to make a film. And from that moment, I set about making this film.
Amazing. So let's have a look at the extract of this excellent film that exposes Lithuania's role during the Holocaust.
How do we, the Jews of Lithuania, tell our story? How do we describe our 600-year-old community, a gem of the Jewish exile? How to reveal our historic contribution to both Torah study and modernity? Are there words to describe the cruelty of our slaughter, without parallel, even in Holocaust Europe? We'll start our story with the birth of two Lithuanian children, a boy and a girl. The girl is Catholic, a sort of Lithuanian princess.
I grew up in a very Lithuanian family in the heart of the Lithuanian community in Chicago, which was in Market Park at the time. And I spoke Lithuanian first before English. Even though I was born in Chicago, I spoke Lithuanian first. And when I went to kindergarten, I couldn't speak English.
The boy is Jewish. He is born in Port Elizabeth, South Africa.
Three of my grandparents were born in the old country, and my fourth grandparent was first generation born in South Africa. His mother was from Kovno, so we were an entirely Litvak family.
The area around Market Park was super Lithuanian. In that area is the Nativity Church, Nativity BVM, and that's where my parents got married. And then there's Holy Cross Hospital, which was run by the Sisters of St. Casimir, and that's where I was born. Then next to Holy Cross Hospital was Maria High School, also run by the Sisters of St. Casimir, and that's where I went to high school. That's where almost all the Lithuanian girls went if they lived in that area. My mother went there.
And life in Port Elizabeth was just taking the shtetl from Lithuania and moving it to Port Elizabeth. The community was Jewish, the way we grew up was Jewish. Even though we were living at the bottom tip of Africa, it was a Lithuanian Jewish lifestyle.
There was the 69th Street called the Lithuanian Plaza, My grandmother lived like half a block away. She never really had to learn English. She could exist completely and totally speaking Lithuanian for the most part.
My grandfather used to tell me stories about the old country. Every conversation had some component about the old country, but there was always a huge gap and a secret. He used to show me photographs from the old country, and he used to say, this is so-and-so, and this is so-and-so. And I'd say, and where do they live? And then there would be silence. One day I went to my uncle, and I said to my uncle, tell me what my grandparents are hiding. And my uncle had the most horrendous response. He actually started screaming at me. He said, don't you ever ask your grandparents those questions. Do you know how much pain it causes them?
Slivia Foti's grandfather was a dashing Lithuanian war hero. His name was Jonas Noreika.
My mother and my grandmother would tell me stories about him, and I learned to be very, very proud of him. I had heard that he tried to save the country from the communists, and he was caught by the KGB and imprisoned in the KGB prison, and that's where he died. And he died at the age of 36, a martyr for the country. I felt like a princess because everywhere we would go, my mother, who was an opera singer and rather a flamboyant personality anyway, would say, look, here's my daughter Slivia, the granddaughter of Jonas Noreika, and everybody would go, ooh, ah, how wonderful. So this was a common experience, maybe every weekend in some way.
So that's an extract from JQ's, such a powerful, such a moving and such an important documentary. And again, it's such a pleasure to have you on the programme discussing this film that you've made and the personal cost that you've gone through to actually make this film. And I'm so pleased you've done it. But can you share with us your two main characters in this film? So we have Grant Gochin, who is born Jewish in South Africa, but of Jewish Lithuanian descent, and Slivia Foti, born in the US, obviously from a Lithuanian family, who's the granddaughter of Jonas, sorry if I pronounced the name right, Nikaria, who was Noreika, who she believed from her mother and from her grandmother that he was a Lithuanian war hero, and he ends up being a Nazi war criminal. So share with us about the two characters and how you were able to blend their two stories into one, really on their incredible quest for the truth.
They are both, to my mind, real heroes. Grant has been working on this story for 35 years. Slivia for a little bit less, but probably 25 years. And both of them were, in a way, led into this challenge through promises to grandparents. Grant promised his late grandfather that he would say Kaddish for the family that were murdered and try and find survivors. Of course, there were none. And Slivia made a promise to her mother and her grandmother that she would finish the heroic biography of her grandfather, Jonas Noreika, whatever happened. And so both started their journeys together. Grant very quickly, because it was knowledge for decades before that Jonas Noreika was a mass murderer. So in some ways, Grant's role was slightly less difficult because the facts were there. Slvia's was much more difficult because in order to get to the truth, Slivia had to go against her family, her people, her community, the Lithuanian community in Chicago, and her country, which she regards as Lithuania. To me, Slivia is one of the bravest people I've ever met. I think in many ways the Lithuanian community, the expat Lithuanian community, is similar to the expat Jewish communities. They're deeply sensitive, they're very patriotic, very proud of where they come from, they're very a little bit paranoid. The Lithuanians have good reason to be paranoid, being a very close neighbor of Russia, and very insular. So for Slivia to do that, I kind of understand the pressures that would have been brought to bear on her. And she did it through years and years of struggle, and the cost to her was so enormous. She lost everything in the writing of her book. But she discharged her promise, and to her enormous credit, she told the absolute truth. And as she says in the film, the reason she did it is because of her Christian faith. That is what drove her to tell the truth. She is, to my mind, one of the greatest people I've ever met. And I wish her nothing but success in this, because her success, a lot depends on this. One thing that depends on it is the veracity of the Holocaust and the way we tell this story. Because if Lithuania gets away with its lies, then clearly the Holocaust will have come to mean nothing, which doesn't protect us against future Holocausts and doesn't do justice to what happened between 1939 and 1945.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at the second extract of this wonderful and very powerful and moving documentary, JQs.
So before I left Lithuania, I got a strange call. And he says, I'm just calling to say that I'm sorry more of the country's leaders didn't come. And I said, okay, why didn't they come? And he said, because of the Jews. And I said, what could the Jews say? And he just sighed. I could just hear him sigh. And the more Lithuanians I started talking to about this, it's like a lot of Lithuanians knew that my grandfather was involved, heard the rumor that he was involved in killing Jews. So it's like this open secret that everybody knew except me, it seemed. I was convincing myself that it is just communist propaganda. I come back to Chicago and I talk to my father and, you know, other people, and I'm like, have you heard this crazy rumor about my grandfather killing Jews? And like, yeah, we heard it. I'm like, what? Like, this is common knowledge. Like, lots of people have heard this and I've never heard this. And I said, how come nobody ever told me? And they're like, well, it's not true. Why would we talk about it? It's just communist propaganda. Okay. So, I went into denial for more than, for about 10 years. I don't know the exact date, but it was about 10 years. It took me a long, long time to accept this, that this was really true. Part of the process in accepting it was deciding that I wanted to continue with the story. Because at this point, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I was all alone doing this. And I just knew already that if I continue with this book, I was going to disgrace Lithuania. And it was one of the turning points for me, psychologically, internally, to decide to still go ahead and do it. I'm doing this for the love of Lithuania. Because if it's the truth, you have to face it. And I feel like this is the patriotic thing to do. This is what it means to be a patriot of Lithuania. Because if we don't face this, and if Lithuania doesn't face this, it cannot become healthy and strong and move forward with grace.
Grant Gochin's discovery that Jonas Nareka, the murderer of his family, was a Lithuanian national hero, sparked a fierce determination to fight back. The first hurdle was to claim his Lithuanian citizenship.
I provided Lithuania with my grandfather's documents. The fact that my grandfather had fought for Lithuanian independence. And they were so adamant that they were not going to issue citizenship to a Jew. They denied his service to the country. They slandered his service. He had a small photograph of him in his Lithuanian military uniform. I took this photograph and went to Lithuania's preeminent military historian. And the historian looked at the epaulets on my grandfather's uniform, identified my grandfather's unit, went to the archives, to that unit's records, and found my grandfather's records. So we could present to the court that my grandfather fought in the Lithuanian military. The Lithuanian government's position was that the military historian could be lying. I was so angry and so insulted. How dare somebody insult such a fine, decent human being after what they had done to the rest of the family? This is not going to stand. So I launched my first lawsuit.
During Gochin's Kafkaesque battle to prove that its grandfather was indeed his grandfather, he offered a well-known aunt as a witness. Her name was Esther Barzel.
She was born in a shtetl called Rogova in Lithuania. Esther was a very unique woman. She was one of Nelson Mandela's closest friends. She was imprisoned for her fight in the liberation struggle in South Africa. Her cell was in the cell next door to Mr. Mandela's. My uncle's cell was just a little bit further down from Mr. Mandela's. My uncle was tortured to death in solitary confinement by the South African regime. My Aunt Esther Barzel, who is known as one of the greatest heroes of the South African liberation struggle, wrote a letter of testimony for the Lithuanian court, saying that she had known my grandfather for most of her life. And yes, he was Lithuanian, a Jew, and my grandfather. Without even looking at the testimony, the government of Lithuania called one of South Africa's greatest national heroes unreliable and dismissed her testimony. It became so obvious that the denials were based on anti-Semitism.
And you can see from that extract of the documentary JQs what an incredible people Slivia and Grant are. Their passion and hunger for truth and justice, and we can all learn something from their incredible example. Michael, can you just maybe give us an underlying history lesson as why the Lithuanians carried out the massacres against the Jewish people without much help or cooperation or encouragement from the Nazis when they were occupied?
I think certainly the Nazis gave them ideological encouragement and also gave them legal agency to do it. But many of the worst atrocities happened before actually the Nazis came in. It was after the Russians had left. There was the build-up of propaganda that had happened through fascist organizations and nationalist organizations in the years preceding that. But to be honest with you, I don't know why such cruelty was visited on the Jewish people who, as I say, had lived there for 600 years, for the most part, rather peacefully. One of the things that characterizes particularly the rural Lithuanian Holocaust, and that's opposed to, say, the killing of 70,000 Jews in Vilna at the Panari Forest, where 70,000 were murdered. In the villages it was different. It could be 11 people, maybe one family, maybe two family, or 100, or 2,000, or 1,000. And these murders were often committed by their neighbors. But what characterized it was the period before, and this is the most important period, where there was a deliberate attempt to dehumanize us, to torture us, to kill children in front of parents. Rape was a very, very common weapon used against the youngest of girls. The killing of old men, particularly religious men, that was a particular target. The setting fire of beards, immolations, the cutting off of heads, the splitting apart of bodies, and also the incarceration of entire Jews. This happened under Noreka's rule, where all the Jews of Plunga, about 40% of the town, were herded into the synagogue. They were kept there for 3 weeks in the summer heat, and they were deprived of water and food. And the reason, I think a lot about this was the need for this dehumanization. Why was it so important to the people who hated us? And that was because in our last moments before we were murdered, they wanted us to say there is no God, there is no value to being Jewish. That's what they wanted to drive out of us. The humiliation, in many ways, to my mind, was actually worse than the murders, because it utterly reduced us to the level of animals, and it sought to strip from us all the dignity we'd accrued in the last, well, almost 4,000 years of our national life as Jewish people. As to why people did this, I'm afraid you have to ask them. I don't know. I'm as mystified as anybody by the cruelty and the extent of that cruelty.
And of course today Lithuania haven't come to terms with their crimes that they committed during the Second World War and the Holocaust in particular. But did you think that church replacement theology and that dangerous teaching, Bible teaching that says that the Christians have replaced the Jewish people in the plan of God was ultimately what caused these mass murders against the Jewish people in Lithuania?
I have no doubt it played a part. How else then can normal people murder 300 children in a day? How can you take babies and smash their skulls against trees to save bullets unless you believe they are subhuman? Unless you believe they are the enemy of humanity? Unless you believe they are guilty of killing God? It's the only way you can come to a moral formulation like that, which enables such practices. As I say, Simon, I'm no expert at this, but I do feel this is something the Christian world has to consider. And they also have to consider the wanton way Lithuania lies. Lithuania actually has an institute that is there. It employs over 100 historians to make up lies about the Holocaust so they can continue to hero worship mass murderers like Noreka. There's a school named after Noreka, his monument's there, there are streets named after him. This is a man who killed 14,500 people and presided over an empire of utter debased cruelty. Yet they will go to any lengths to try and resurrect his name and declare him innocent when everybody knows he's guilty. I'm afraid I just cannot understand it, but I think replacement theology must play a part in that.
So let's have a look at another extract of JQs, and this time looking at the cruelties that the Lithuanians committed against their own Jewish civilians.
For Slivia Foti, the cruelty of her grandfather's regime was profoundly traumatic.
I have heard stories where Jews ran from Lithuanians to the Germans, asking for Germans for help from the Lithuanians. And for me to be part of that, at least by heritage and blood, is so painful. I want to disassociate myself from it.
The other two personal items of family history are especially painful to Slivia. The first is this photograph of a party in Plunga, taken 2 weeks after the massacre.
So in the picture were 100 Lithuanians from Plunga in like 5-7 rows, standing, the sun is in their eyes, and it's a afternoon, and there my grandfather was there, my grandmother was there, my mother was in the lap of my grandfather's sister, Antonella. And it took me a long time to piece this together. This is why it took me, in 2013, I didn't connect this yet. But later, as I'm writing the story, through those 5 years, and I'm putting this together, I'm like, son of a gun. They had a party after all these 2,000 Jews were, like half the town went missing. And they're having a party. And one of the stages of genocide is a celebration of the genocide. And so that's what that was. It's a celebration of the genocide. Although the Genocide Center, right, I put there, says, oh no, they were just celebrating getting rid of the communists. It has nothing to do about killing Jews.
The second are two grotesquely personal items looted by Noreka.
There were like bookshelves, maybe like a mirror, some clothing, but there were also like these 2 nightcaps that people, I guess, used to wear on their heads to go to sleep, to stay warm. I have this image of him and my grandmother in bed wearing these nightcaps. And I think, how is this possible? And they were not the only two Lithuanians doing this. It is possible that every single Lithuanian home in Lithuania has some Jewish artifact. That is possible, and I wonder.
And it's absolutely imperative that Michael gets justice, the Jewish community from Lithuania get justice, and the truth is told. And again, well done for making such a powerful and remarkable documentary. But can you share with us the extent of the atrocities that were committed in Lithuania and then the cover-up? Because yeah, there was we know after the Second World War, the Soviet Union took control of Lithuania. It was under communist rule until the collapse of the Berlin Wall in '89, and then the collapse of the Soviet Empire back in '91, and then Lithuania became an independent nation again. So share with us the extent of the atrocities and the extent of the cover-up after Lithuania became an independent country.
The Holocaust in Lithuania was the most successful in all of Europe in terms of the proportions murdered. 96.4% of all Lithuanian Jews were murdered. And remember, every Jew that was murdered was also humiliated, tortured, imprisoned, robbed. That happened to every single one. So 96.4% amounted to about 220,000 people. And to this day, Lithuania denies any responsibility. There was a list called the Melamed list, compiled by a guy called Joseph Melamed, who was a free partisan fighter. He managed to escape from Kaunas. And he compiled the list of murderers and came to about 21,000. This list was supposed to be verified by the Lithuanian authorities, who of course did everything they could to bury and ignore it, which they did successfully. And so no list of murderers has ever been published. And in fact, not one single murderer, torturer, abuser, robber from the entire Lithuanian Holocaust has ever been punished. In other words, by creating a false narrative, by creating a historical institute that is there to tell lies about the Holocaust, Lithuania has escaped scot-free. And worse than that, they've lied to their own people. So their people have no idea about this. To my mind, this is a wrong that has to be righted. This cannot be allowed to persist. And because of Slivia Foti, they won't get away with it this time. She is our best opportunity to tell the truth about what happened in Lithuania. And we are extraordinarily lucky to have a woman of such moral caliber.
Absolutely. And how have the Lithuanian authorities taken to your documentary? And share with us the kind of their response to your documentary, JRQs.
Well, this has been really interesting. When it was shown in South Africa, it was shown, we expected about 5,000 viewers. I allowed it to be shown online because I wanted the South African Jewish community, who are probably the most conspicuously Lithuanian Litvak community in the world, to have an opportunity to see this, to learn something about their own grandparents and their history. It made a huge impact. Over 100,000 actually ended up watching it. And it was, honestly, it electrified the community. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that. The Lithuanian ambassador to South Africa was due to make a statement about this. And as I understand it, minutes before he pulled out. And to this day, they have never said a single word. They are hoping that if they cover their ears and close their eyes, it will just go away. I've got news for them, it won't. But to this moment, they've never said a word about it. They haven't responded. Europe and Judeo-Christian culture are. Do we take this seriously? Do we take this mass murder seriously? We are told that we do. The EU never stops banging on about it, how important the Holocaust Day is, and they fetishize it to that extent. But really, they allow Lithuania, which has European protection, NATO protection, to get away with absolute lies about it. And the lies are there in order to enable them to hero worship mass murderers. I don't know how they square this with their own moral pronouncements. They clearly don't think it's important, and I'm sorry to say many Jewish organizations equally don't. It's convenient to forget these things. My view is that Slivia Foti represents a challenge, both a Christian challenge and a Jewish challenge. From the Jewish point of view, we have an obligation to support somebody who tells the truth. She is, in fact, a contemporary rescuer. What she's rescuing is the truth. As for the Christian world, I think they have a duty to at last have a look at this and to take it seriously. Do I expect them to? No, I don't. And the secular European world? No, they're also wanting to forget because they're more convenient things to think about. Much better to bash Israel than think about the Holocaust.
So let's have a look at the final extract of JFQs, and this time is looking at the whole issue of Holocaust denial.
And what of our murderers? What were their names? Thanks to this extraordinary man, we do have some idea. Joseph A. Malamed escaped the slaughter in Kaunas to fight with the partisans. He compiled this list of over 20,000 Lithuanian killers. Malamed's list was never officially published because of Lithuanian objections. A deal was apparently struck. The list would be suppressed until the Lithuanian scholars had done their own research. Their research was never done, so no names have ever been released. Where did our rapists, torturers, and murderers go? Mostly they went west, to a town near you.
When the Soviets were coming into Lithuania, the Lithuanian Holocaust perpetrators knew that the Soviets would punish them for their crimes. So many of the perpetrators went west. They declared themselves to be anti-Nazi, anti-communist, represented that they were victims, entered displaced persons camps, and came to England, Australia, the United States, and Canada. There were investigations in the United States. In one city block on the East Coast, 11 members of one killing unit lived near each other. They gave each other cover. They testified on behalf of each other, and they escaped culpability. The Lithuanians that were captured by the US government, Lithuania resisted receiving them as deportees, and when they were returned to Lithuania, the Lithuanian government didn't punish them. The interim Prime Minister of Lithuania for the provisional government was named Brazaitis. Brazaitis, under any concept of law, was a Holocaust perpetrator. Like many of the Lithuanian Holocaust perpetrators, he escaped to the West and was reburied in the United States. In 2012, the government of Lithuania exhumed his remains and repatriated them to Lithuania to be reburied with full state honors. Outside historical organizations told the Lithuanian government that he was a Holocaust perpetrator. Internal Lithuanian historical associations told the government of Lithuania that he's a Holocaust perpetrator. The Genocide Center said he had been completely exonerated and rehabilitated by the US government. A completely dishonest statement. What it represents, they are willing to insult and demean the very members of Congress that are giving them NATO and US support. Their murderers are more important to them than the value of their state.
Have we had any kind of justice? Has anyone been punished for these terrible crimes against us?
Lithuania has not punished a single person that persecuted a Jew. Instead of punishing the murderers, they have named them as heroes. This is reflective of a national value system.
Lithuania, in a small town outside of Kovno, or in the Lithuanian language, Kaunas, Kaunas, born in 1927, February 18th, 1927. I'm the seventh of a family of 9 children. We were an observant Jewish family, and we were taught the Bible and how to live by it with respect and truth, and know who you are. Communists. There is an old saying in Russia, a man stands there in front of the mirror to shave himself, and he says, "Who is the spy, you or I?" Everybody spied on everybody. And that was terrible. So, what happens? Stalin signed with Hitler that they are not going to attack each other and that they are going to be good neighbors. Well, that didn't last very long. The Russians marched in June 1940. June 1941, 22nd of June, the Germans attacked Lithuania. At that point, I was ready for the high school at my age, and there was only the Lithuanian high school, and I knew what to expect, so did my mother. And there was one Yiddish Jewish school left in Kaunas. And being that my oldest brother and my older sister lived in Kaunas, they didn't come back with us to the village, they lived in the big city. So mother said, go to Kaunas, and there you'll be able to sign up in that school. Sometimes you wonder what destiny is. What did it mean, the change in 1 week? And as I was in Kaunas, the war broke out. The Nazis attacked. I stayed with my sister and my brother. When we found out that we are really in great danger, we packed up a few things and we took the road. Everybody said, if you'll get into Russia, nobody's going to kill you there. And we started to run towards the border, which would have had to take us to Vilnius, which is the border of Belarus, Ukraine. And as we came closer to Vilnius, about 50 kilometers or so, we saw some people coming back. And we asked them, why are you coming back? They said the Nazis had a different plan. They circled around Lithuania. So they were at the Russian border before we were. So we got stuck with tens of thousands of Russian soldiers, and we couldn't get out. So slowly, with all the troubles, we started to walk back. And as we walked on the highway to go back to Kaunas, the planes would lower themselves real low and shoot at us. And a lot of people were killed like this way. And we went back to Kaunas. We come back. There's no connection with my family. There was a 5th column in Lithuania who worked with the Nazi Gestapo, that they will help them occupy and take over Lithuania, because Hitler promised the Lithuanians that they'll be independent when they come. But of course it wasn't so. So in the meantime, they started to kill the Jews. The Lithuanian civilians started to kill the Jews. Why not? They can take this chair from them. They can take something else from them. So even before the Germans gave them an order, they killed thousands of Jews. Lithuania was a small country of about 3 million people. Almost every 10th person was a Jew. 98% of this Jewish population is gone now. They killed 98% of their Jewish population. The Germans, with the great help of Lithuanians and Ukrainians, there was a group of Ukrainians who were like an army, and they had a little black sign on the corner of their military coat, and they would be together with the Germans at the killing brigade. And in 1941, August, we were told to pack up, get out of our homes in Kaunas, and go to the suburb across the bridge, and that's what became the Jewish ghetto. Outside, on the hills around this suburb, in that part of Lithuania, there used to be a fort for soldiers. Now it became the killing grounds. They would bring in Jews even from as far as Austria, and they would take them there and kill them in pits. And we used to hear in the ghetto, we used to hear many times the shooting and the marching of the people. In the ghetto, it was my sister, my brother, my sister-in-law and I. We got a room together with friends, each little room for a family. And the ghetto we were closed in, and we were guarded by Lithuanian and German guards all around where the ghetto was, outside. The first thing that happened after we were told not to go anywhere, we will not be able to get through, and not to come to the barbed wire, because we'll be shot. They started to give out orders. First order, we need doctors for this and this part. We'll take you out to work. We need professors from college in this and this field. May all those men come and register. Well, the next day before we found 500 men signed up from that caliber, and most of them were hanged. We saw them, and then some of them were killed even before they hanged them. To explain how that can happen from such a highly cultured country is beyond my understanding, and I'm sure many, many millions of people couldn't understand that.
Lithuania's capital, Vilnius, is celebrating its 700th anniversary this year. Now, much of that history was created by its Jewish community. Vilnius was long known as a center of Jewish culture and learning, lending its name to the great 18th century rabbinical scholar, the Vilna Gaon, and earning a name as the Jerusalem of the North. But it is also a scene of Jewish persecution and tragedy, culminating in the Nazi liquidation of the Vilnius ghetto in September 1943. So this week, Lithuania and Jewish leaders also marked that somber anniversary. And among those who took part in marking that there as a guest was Professor Dina Porat, Emeritus in the Department of Jewish History at Tel Aviv University. She joins us now from the town of Ramat HaSharon in Israel. Professor Porat, thank you for joining us. Well, tell us a little about going to Vilnius and how you see the significance that during this year of celebration of this, Lithuania also marked the anniversary of that tragedy of the Jewish ghetto there.
Yeah. Thank you for having invited me to speak about this really moving Memorial Week. I can call it a Memorial Week because near the Kovno ghetto, the ghetto in the city of Kovno, the killing site in the 9th Fort was a place we a delegation of about 100 people who came from Israel, stayed, spoke, described again what happened to them, put flowers, etc. And then a walk during the Kovno ghetto. And then Vilnius, which you mentioned quite rightly, was the place called not only Jerusalem of the North, but the Jerusalem of Lithuania. A vibrant Jewish community, creative, with all political use, with all forms of writing, creating, etc., lived there for hundreds of years and was executed, one may say, in the summer of 1941, and then its end in the summer of 1943. So we went to Ponar, to the place near Vilna where the killing took place. And again, the prime minister came, ministers, ambassadors, flowers, speeches. I think I can say, you know that, sir, a minute before we started, just a minute ago, I got word from the Israeli ambassador in Lithuania to the effect that today and yesterday, the Lithuanian government decided to commemorate better the contribution of Lithuanian Jewry to adopt the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism, to have mutual projects, to honor Jews who fought back in the ghettos of Lithuania, Vilna, Kovna, Shavli, and the others. So I feel a change.
Right.
I do feel a change. How there is a, you see, 80 years have passed. There is a third generation. The third generation is more open to acknowledge what happened. It's not their fault.
Right.
It's not their fault. And they are open to acknowledge what happened, to confirm and I understand and face the fact that Lithuanians killed Jews.
Okay, well, let me ask you that, Professor Porat, because one of your fellow guests there, the Yad Vashem chairman, Danny Darian, spoke in Parliament. He did compliment Lithuania, just as you're doing now, but he also said Lithuania also has to, for example, stop the glorification of some of those men, similar to the story we saw about Ukraine before, some of those Lithuanians who collaborated with the Nazis and are still regarded as heroes by some in Lithuania.
I was present when he spoke, of course, and he's absolutely right. He also acknowledges the fact that there are steps, that there is a new generation, that they are being more open. But please understand that all over the East European region, once dominated by Soviet Russia, there is this problem that people who were anti-communists were on the other side pro-Nazis. And they fought the communists. So today, in the post-communist era, they are considered heroes. But they were fighting with the Nazis and helping their plan to execute, to kill, murder all Jews. So Danny Dayan, chairman of Yad Vashem, told them point blank. He said, an anti-Semite cannot be considered a hero. And you cannot now have a monument for him in the main square of the city.
That if the Lithuanian government can get away with what it's doing now, there is no moral lesson to be derived from the Holocaust. If Lithuania can put up a statue of Jonas Noriega, then why can't Germany put up a statue of Adolf Eichmann? Do you think that's an exaggeration?
Michael, imagine sending your kid to Adolf Hitler High School. You know, but in Lithuania, they send their kids to Noreika School. If a government can rewrite a genocide to say somebody else did it, the murderers are heroes, nobody saw anything, nobody knew anything, and get away with it, and it's a European government, then why would any other government say we're going to be held to account? So maybe we shouldn't perpetrate a genocide, or maybe we shouldn't do human rights violations because we could. They have, this is the clearest, most obvious case of Holocaust revisionism that exists. If this isn't addressed, why wouldn't every genocidal maniac do exactly the same thing when they know that they can get away with it?
And Grant, if I may take it on from that, what is the Jewish responsibility here? And have you been adequately supported, do you feel, by Jewish communities across the world?
No, I've not had any support, I'm sorry to say, and I don't understand why.
May I ask, is that because of the propagandist efforts of the Lithuanian government? I've seen with my own eyes how they take great care to say how much they love the Jews and how they adore the Vilna Gaon. But this is all a disguise to hide the crime of Holocaust denial. Would you agree with that assessment?
Look, Michael, we're a PTSD community. We're so anxious for somebody to tell us that they love us that we'll do anything if somebody tells us that they love us. So Lithuania comes and says, we love you, we love you, we love you, look away from the Holocaust. Somebody else did it. I can't answer for anybody else. I can only, I'm confused why I've had to do this on my own. I'm confused why our big NGOs haven't stepped forward to do this. I've been battling Lithuania since before they regained independence, and I've done it on my own. Unfortunately, I do not have community support.
I was at the edge of the grave 3 times, no, 4. Which time was the closest? This. This was the end. It was Christmas Eve, the 24th of December, 1941. I wasn't about to run away. I was an old woman, 11 years of age, and an old woman. I was unhappy. I couldn't understand what was going on. It was terrible, and it doesn't leave me. Sometimes I see this massacre in my dreams. We were stood beside the grave, machine guns started shooting, and I fell. In the night I crawled out from among the corpses. The killers, the white ribbons, were celebrating, drinking schnapps. They were celebrating beside the pit, beside their victims. They were singing. It was Christmas Eve. It was December the 24th. I have to say the truth. I didn't see any Germans at the grave, only Lithuanians.
השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום. והעמידנו מלכנו לחיים לחיים, ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך. השכיבנו אדוני